Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you all so much for joining us here on CPA Academy. This is Jason Bookman speaking. I'm happy to welcome you into today's webinar on diversity and inclusion, focusing on relationships, a millennial approach to DE&I. And our two presenters on the screen for you right now are Jina Etienne and Victor Moody, who you're going to hear a lot from over the next hour. Before we get into the webinar, I want to go through some technical checks and make sure that everything is working for all of you in the audience. If you haven't done so already, please head over to the GoToWebinar questions panel. Should be over on the right side of your screen. Let me know that you can see our presenters and see the slides. Let me know that you can hear my voice. And feel free to let me know where you're listening in from. We always love knowing where our audience is here on CPA Academy. And I so far see people checking in from Nashville, from New Mexico, from New Orleans, maybe a lot of other new places, but so glad to have you all here with us today and glad to see that everything is working. And now that we know everything is working, I want to let you know that if you're having trouble seeing or hearing or answering polls throughout the webinar, let me know in this questions panel and I'll do the best I can to get all of your troubleshooting addressed as quickly as possible. Let's move into some housekeeping regarding polls and credit for today's webinar. This is a 1 CPE webinar. And in order to earn that 1 CPE, you need to stay logged in for at least 50 minutes. You also need to answer at least 3 of the 4 poll questions that will come up throughout the webinar. And when the polls come up, just hit the button corresponding with your answer and then hit your submit button on that poll box in order to confirm your response. We here at CPA Academy will use those polls and your time logged in to issue credit, which will be done by the end of the day today and available in your CPA Academy accounts within 24 to 48 hours. And now that we've gotten through all of the housekeeping up front, I'm going to step out of the way and turn things over to Jina. So Jina, the floor is yours. And thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you everyone for joining. I saw a lot of folks on the West Coast, so please stay cool out there because it's still a little bit toasty. I can't even imagine. So joining me today is Victor Moody. Victor was introduced, well, I was introduced to Victor last summer by a colleague and friend, and he had just launched Racebridge, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. I was excited to invite Victor to join me today because he's passionate for D&I, and I really love his perspective. It's refreshing. So Victor, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jina. I'm excited. I think this is going to be really great, so excited to get started.
So before we start, I'm going to throw out some stats. Just kind of do a quick recap. One, I have a data slide here that talks about the different dimensions of diversity. And I wanted to circle, so I'm circling here the generational differences because that's really what we're focusing on today. And you can see here that millennials, that's you, or not. I don't know. We're going to talk about that in a second. But millennials, I think a lot of people think of millennials as the 20-somethings, but they're anywhere from, well, this is needed to be upticked by a year. They're 25 to 40 years old, depending on what data source you look at. And looking at generations is an aspect of diversity that is starting to get a lot of discussion. There are other dimensions here, but I just wanted to highlight that for those who are joining us, like who's a millennial? And then this I found really interesting. I found this a couple years ago, that when you look at the generations, and I just really split it, I don't have Gen Z here, but baby boomers and Gen Xers, which is, I mean, technically I'm a Gen X. The view and the approach to D&I has historically been along the lines of, say, EEOC protections, representations in those groups. However, and you'll validate this for us, millennials see it more holistically. Millennials see diversity more about the intersectionality of people's identities and exploring and respecting and appreciating different perspectives and experiences. There's one other thing I want to share, and this came out of a LinkedIn report. I want to say it came out last summer, and it really looked at how you can leverage and understand and appreciate generational differences in the workforce. And so there are different skills, generally speaking, across the age groups. And then how do you navigate and manage groups like that? So for example, here, there can be conflicts between different generations because of differences in management style or differences in communication style. And so those are the kinds of things that businesses need to think about as they start to explore D&I, especially today. There are as many as 5 generations in the workforce potentially in the same company.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with, I'm going to go back to this slide because I remember when we were talking about planning for this, I asked you, are you a millennial? and,
Yeah.
and you said, and I asked you, do you buy into the term? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, well, first of all, when I look at people, I just look at people. You know, all the identifiers, all the factors of their race, their age, their gender, all that stuff plays a part. But I think for the majority of people, I think you'll bring up the statistic in a little bit. But I think a lot of people, like 80% of people, or let's say when the average person or the everyday person meets someone else, they use those factors, those identifiers, and maybe it makes up about 80% of the person. Their race, their gender, their age makes up about 80% of their perception. Whereas for me, because I've met so many people, because I've communicated with so many different types of people, I think that plays about 15%. So the more people you meet, the less those factors play a role, because you realize that people are different based on their individuality, based on their identity. As you said in the next slide, which was really key. I love the word individuality and identity. I think those two are very, very important. But yeah, I'm not, I told you I'm 24 years old, so I'm not I'm like borderline what is it, Gen Z and millennial. But yeah, I just,
Well, let's see. Yes. Well, some of them say 24, some of them say 25. So
okay.
It's just like me. I'm going to go with, I was born in 67, so I'm going to go with, I'm a Gen Xer and I am not a boomer. I know I'm not a boomer, but depending on the math, some people might say, but so you're just, I think what you were talking about earlier is what we notice when we see somebody. And the data says the first thing we notice is race or cultural background. The second thing we notice is age. And then the next thing we notice is gender. And and this is the stuff that we notice before we've noticed that we've noticed something.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And you're talking about, for you see beyond that. Part of me is over here like looking at you like, but that's not possible. The brain goes faster than that. But I also, from having talked with you, I think you're just around a lot of different people, and the whole point of your platform, we'll talk about that in a second, is to expand that type of connection. Yeah.
So I mean, when I see somebody, I do see their race. That's what you see. I have good vision, so yes, I do see that. But it just plays it's like okay, I see that, but let's figure out who the person is first. Like because you don't know. Like if you assume, that's the worst thing you can do. We'll get into that, but I think that's just like, how do you know? I mean, I met so many people from different racial backgrounds that are just, they seem like this, but they act like this. And it's just, so race doesn't play much of a role.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, because I think there's this notion, and the science is the science, that if this is what our brain notices, then this is what our brain notices. But that doesn't mean that we react based on those things that we notice. Some people do. But to your point, if you're curious, and that's what you are curious, you explore, you want to meet people, you will turn something on its head and challenge it. So I know you don't necessarily believe in the status quo. So that curiosity is powerful. And I have to tell you, you sound like a millennial, even if you don't think you're one.
Hey, whatever category I fit into is great. But yeah, that word curiosity is very, 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 I identify with that word very much.
Yeah. So what if somebody says to you, I wrote this down. So what if somebody says to you, so I'm having a conversation, I'm talking about, hey, I met this guy, Victor, he's got this stuff going on, and he's 24, and this is what he believes. And they say back to me, well, I think he means well, but he's too young, he doesn't really get it. What would you say to that?
I would say they're probably in some ways right. I mean, I can't jump light years ahead of experiences, but I will say this. I mean, I think I've met babies who've had babies. And what I mean by that is that as an adult, it doesn't matter your age, it matters your experiences, your focus, your discipline, your passions. You know, I think people who are young can have the same passion as someone who's older. And if they have that passion and that discipline, then it'll take them to a more valuable place where they can contribute to society. And I just think that that's something that I cultivate inside of myself. And at the end of the day, if I build a program, if I build a business, that's why I love business, because at the end of the day, my business stands as its own person. I literally think I'm a father. I don't have any kids, but but my business is my kid. So it's like, but it stands as its own person. You know, the way I speak, sure, I lead the company, but I'm building something else here. I'm building something that's going to stand on its own and that's going to create value. And if it has value, then that's all that matters. It doesn't matter about me, right? So.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I remember the first time you said that, because I personally, I'll tell you, I'll be honest. I remember when I met you and I'm like, this young guy, he's trying to do all this stuff. Does he have enough experience? And what I've learned was exactly what you just said, that so somebody like me, older, who might actually think I have enough experience to recognize things, have learned things, I can maybe, my experiences have helped me see things differently. Perhaps I could be a bit dismissive of somebody younger. And you're saying, look, I have the experience I have. I'm not suggesting I know everything, and I might even change my mind.
Yeah. And I think it's also, I'm not afraid to fail, and I'm in this for the long game anyway. So the stuff that I know today, it will be different, 30 years from now, 20 years from now. But I'm just not afraid to just try now. Like, I was reading an article yesterday, they were interviewing people on LinkedIn. I believe it was Inc., the media company Inc. And they asked, LinkedIn professionals of ages 40 to 50, what would you tell your 20-year-old self? And they just said, action, take action. Don't think too much, don't plan too much, just take action. And for me, you don't have to tell me things multiple times. Like, I'm the type of guy, when I hear something that sounds good, if I believe in it, then I'm just going to do it. So I like to listen to people who are older than me. I love to find mentors who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, because I want to hear their experiences and learn from their experiences to make sure that I, lead the best way possible, even as a young professional. But there are some things in regards to corporate America that I have not experienced, that I don't know about. But I think that's also a key piece to what I'm trying to do as a leader as well. I don't want to be perfect. I want to make mistakes because I want to understand all sides. I want to understand the people who are trying to grow, the people who think they're the best. And I want to make mistakes because I want to know. I don't want to feel like I'm above everybody. I want to feel like, okay, I learned that lesson too. I'm not perfect. Like, I don't consider myself a DEI expert. I just consider myself a guy who just cares about this stuff and just, wants to put in the work.
So to that point, I was doing some research today. I wanted to double check the stats, and I found a Gallup stat. 47% of millennials prioritize diversity when they're considering a future employer. So I know you're not looking for a job, but something you just said stuck out at me, which is diversity is important to me. So if you were looking for a job, or your peers that are, out there, hustling and looking for jobs, do they actually think about this stuff the way that the newspapers report? I mean, is it something that is top of mind, or is it something you think, well, how do I say this? You look at a company and you're thinking, well, I would hope so. And it is the lack of commitment that jumps out at you, because there's a presumption that, of course, diversity is important.
So are you asking, what's the question that you asked?
Well, I'm asking for you, from your perspective. I know you're not looking for a job, but if you are looking at an employer, do you look at the employer with the expectation that, of course, they do stuff for diversity? Because if they don't, that tells me a lot about, I don't know, how forward thinking they are, or what.
Yeah, it depends. It's rough. I want to say just the straight up answer, yes. That in any kind of situation, I look for diversity. I told you last time, any kind of room where there's all Black people, I don't want to be in that room. Any room where it's all white people, I don't want to be in that room. I love to see people come together in all groups across, whether it's a social event, personal, business, it doesn't matter. I want people coming together. It gets difficult in certain areas of industries. For example, let's say like an insurance industry, finance, tech, stuff like that, because those industries don't really have, a lot of these conversations are very, very nuanced. So if the pipeline of diversity isn't, because I'm sitting here, I'm from Philadelphia, so I'm sitting here thinking about the way our school system is set up and just what kids decide to focus on as in their youth. And it's just usually never like corporate or business. At least when I was growing up, I never really heard about business ever, like ever.
Well, there's data that indicate that where you grow up has a lot to do with what you're exposed to. And,
Right.
So this isn't a conversation that's focused on the accounting profession, but for those who are listening, one of the first sessions we did back in February was Herschel Frierson. He's the chairman of the National Association of Black Accountants. And we talked specifically about how African Americans, there's not a lot of awareness in the accounting profession. Part of it is because, not to suggest that everybody who's Black is in an inner city school, but if you look at the disparities between educations for minorities versus education for the white population, they're not the same.
Yeah.
So you're saying you never heard about business. Part of it is community. Part of it is ethnicity and the messages that we send to each other.
Yeah. There's so many different angles to look at it from. Like you said, the inside of our community, inside the Black community, I mean, there's just, like I said, I haven't seen too many leaders who were
Like
in
you.
corporate America. Yeah, who were, so it's just rough. It's really rough because you never get that representation, but then you look in the media and you don't get that representation. So it's like
Either that or they're reinforcing stereotypes.
and
So
but I do believe that, see, I go a little bit deeper with my analysis of people in regards to sociology and stuff like that. So I do believe that certain types of groups have a little bit more ability in areas. For example, we run the sports and entertainment industry. It's just, I don't know why. I mean, I can look back into history of, Black people were expected to perform, use, Negro spirituals to connect. And so maybe there's just a natural knack for musical connection and expression and communication, stuff like that. Even, using a lot of physical labor could produce a lot of athletic, but none of this stuff is proven. This is just the stuff that goes through my head. But
this is Victor thinking.
Yeah. So it's interesting but then when you look at the leadership and who's running these organizations, that's where it really boils me. It really, really boils me when I see every time I see an NBA championship and there's just this white guy comes down, hey, we won the championship.
He's the one who gets to hold up the trophy. Yeah.
That's where it gets me.
So it's interesting. I'll admit that I was having a wee bit of a reaction as you were saying some of that stuff, because I'm thinking it felt a little cringy.
Mm-hmm.
But by the same token, I'm like, yeah, but here's the thing, that's your perspective. And part of the reason I see things the way I do is because of what I learned when I was growing up. Because I went to elementary school in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And what I was exposed to then is so different than it would be for my kids. And as I get older, I have to unlearn some things that I learned when I was younger and start to see things differently. And mm-hmm. I think what you're talking about is, and maybe we can jump into why you started this platform and maybe tell us a little bit about it. But if management, to what you're talking about, is not that diverse, and yet we have young folks, I don't even want to say young folks, smack my hand. Millennials today are as old as 40 years old. And so many people think that they're still in their 20s, but we need to be developing them as leaders. So how do they get that leadership development opportunity and those networking opportunities if they're inside organizations that still aren't particularly diverse? Enter Racebridge, right? Oh, yeah. Wait, somebody's asking about a polling question. Thank you. We needed to launch. Oh my, we should have launched the first polling question. Can we do that, Jason?
Sure, no problem. We're going to go ahead and launch poll question number 1. So while the audience is voting on poll question number 1, I want to remind everyone in the audience that if you have any questions for Jina or Victor, go ahead and put those questions in the questions panel. If you have any comments throughout the webinar, go ahead and put those in the questions panel as well. And in the meantime, go ahead and get your votes in on this poll question so we can have a better look of what the audience is, what the age of the audience is for today's webinar. And we're going to leave this up for just a few seconds longer as we already reached a majority of votes. So we can go ahead and close out of this poll in 3, 2, and 1.
I'm looking at the results.
Right,
33% boomer, 25% Gen X, 3% Gen Y, 37% millennial, 2% Gen Z. So if I can do the math right, that's 58% is boomer and Gen X, my age and older. And so I was saying that managers, if businesses want to develop and promote and grow leadership from the millennial group, they need opportunities to grow and develop.
Yeah.
And so Racebridge, by the way, I looked it up. Millennials, 39% of millennials are ethnically diverse in the United States, compared to 18% of boomers. And 48% of Gen Z are ethnically diverse. So if you're talking about ethnic diversity of 39%, and those are people who are in the workforce today, and they're as old as 40, we got some catching up to do. So why Racebridge? What does Racebridge do to close this gap?
Well, when I started Racebridge, it was more so focused on proactive solutions rather than reactive solutions. Like I can't stand people who react and then don't continue to make an actionable plan to continue to progress what they reacted to. When I get emotional about something, I put an action plan in place. I don't get emotional and just let it pass. That's not who I am. So even when I saw protesting, I'm just like, okay, but what's after that? What's after that? When I saw CEOs send out emails to their workforce, we stand with racial diversity. What does all of this mean? It's not doing anything. It doesn't matter. And so when I looked at a lot of like DEI solutions in the current market, there's a lot of focus on online courses and training. Even when you hear people talk about police officers, they say more training, more training, more training. But I wanted to create something that's focused on people, because that's what changes people. When you look at I say, it doesn't matter until it becomes personal to you. Mm-hmm. Some people have moral compasses that are reaching in the right directions. If you just believe that somebody shouldn't be treated unjustly, then that's what you believe. But a lot of people have gray areas. But the reason why I created Racebridge was to give people more relationships across a diverse spectrum, and to give them that opportunity to connect. I was talking to someone in the insurance industry, and they were saying, it was a primary 115 employees. They had all white people. And they said they were in just the outside of Philadelphia area. So there's a lot of white people in that area. And I said, that's okay. That's understandable why you have so many white people there. But, offering them a way to connect with different people is the real solution. It's not about training and information, because you can know something, but it doesn't mean you believe in it. Right. So that's what I'm trying to do, trying to just get people to focus less on courses and information. All that stuff is great. The program that I've built comes with information. But I want to really focus on the impact of people connecting with different people.
Yeah. That's a fair point. I mean, one of the things we know to be true, and look, I do D&I training. A lot of my work is D&I training. And what we know is that training doesn't change behavior.
Right.
And until you meet somebody who's different than you, all of us are guilty of bias. And it's not bad intention, it's bad exposure, it's bad experience, or not bad, a lack of exposure and experience. Mm-hmm. And so part of what will change that is just talking to people. I mean, some who've heard me speak before, I've shared this story. When I was in college, I went to a predominantly white school. And I think there was less than 5% of the population was Black. And I lived on campus the first year, and my roommate walked in, and you could see she was a bit surprised, because if you go to a predominantly white school, you're not expecting to get a non-white roommate.
Yeah.
And we didn't talk for about 2 weeks. And then I finally suspected it might have had something to do with race. And in her case, she never met a Black person before. And it wasn't a question of prejudice. It was a question of anxiety, uncertainty. Like, I don't know what to do. Am I supposed to do something differently? Is she going to like me? And so, she had nothing like a Racebridge, where even though her community was all white, she could have been networking with, hanging out with, meeting more diverse, friends and colleagues.
Right.
Well, it worked out, by the way. We became friends.
Yeah, that's good.
Not having opportunities like that. Many of us live in neighborhoods or go to schools or churches that are not very diverse.
Yeah, across all spectrums. And that's one thing I try to study with even children. Like, at what age do we start to separate ourselves? Because you see little tiny children, they don't care about any of it.
Yep.
They just, hey, that's my friend, who cares? But at what age, like, do we start to say, okay, I belong with this group?
Yeah.
That's the type of stuff that fascinates me. And just talking about all this, it makes me want to, tell people that we don't seek to point the finger. Like, I identify as a Black man, but I don't even like saying it, because I identify as a human being. So it's always hard, because you always got to play these roles in society of just trying to fit in with your identity, with your group, not trying to feel like a traitor, not trying to, because that's one thing, I expect to get if I become successful with this company, is that, oh, look at this, from even inside of the community, why is he trying to be nice to white people? It's because I try to understand, like you said, she probably had anxiety about connecting with you. She never met somebody from a colored background, maybe, or from a Black background. So it's like, what is she feeling? Like, because a lot of people have good hearts, like you said. Like, that's one thing that people have been saying. Oh, I didn't mean that. So I'm trying to capture those people and tell them, okay, it's okay that you didn't mean that, but here's a chance to experience something different and understand where that person was coming from in a non-volatile situation, where your emotions are being triggered, where you're being blamed, where the finger is being pointed at you. None of that is going on here. We, try to get people to, everybody has a stake in building a better country for us all.
Right.
Yeah.
I was sitting here thinking, I was having a little mini reaction. I'm like, oh my God, my children are older than you. That's very depressing. But that was a total digression. One of the things, I think, in just the way you're talking versus the way I'm thinking, it is a living example of the differences of the way we think about D&I.
Really?
And I do diversity for a living, but you're talking about it. Your language is different. Your perspective is different. And I think what I hope maybe some folks in the audience think about as we're talking is, maybe they can see themselves in the way I'm approaching it. Maybe they can see themselves in the way you're approaching it. But either way, we're recognizing that we all don't necessarily talk about D&I exactly the same way, which reinforces that slide I was showing about we see things differently. So do you experience that yourself? Like, when you're so you're meeting out, talking to potential companies and introducing them to your platform. Do you find yourself trying to figure out how do you express it in a way that resonates for them? Because if they already got it, they'd already be doing it. So you're trying to convince them to do something that they haven't thought of doing themselves.
Well, I haven't actually. I'm about to get into sales. I've been working on the past, what's that, like 9-10 months on the program, vetting it with the board. You're on the board, getting you guys to just, review what I've built. That way I have basically the validation, the approval of people who have been in the industry. So just trying to get that authority behind the program has been my sole focus, and just making sure it's at least good enough to get into the market. So I'll jump through those hoops once I start selling it in the upcoming, basically, weeks. But I wanted to ask you, like, what do you, because I was curious when you said, what's your approach? Like, your approach, like, what do you mean approach to DEI? Like, what is it?
I know from our previous conversations, part of what you're trying to do is to get people who wouldn't ordinarily connect to connect.
Right.
and doing that through the workplace. So you're not trying to go out and get people from different churches to commingle and get to know each other. You're not going out and trying to get people from different schools to connect. You're trying to go into companies and invite companies to, I was going to say the word invite twice. I was trying not to do that. You're trying to offer companies a platform and a community that they can invite and encourage their employees to go to, to interact, network, meet, go through professional development and training with a more diverse cohort of colleagues that they're going to find in their own company.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. You want to go to a company and invite them to do that, but the company's thinking, well, we're already doing D&I training. So we're doing everything that they need.
What did you say?
So they're doing everything that they need. And yet you're thinking Racebridge is going to solve a different problem.
Yeah, I think if you get your team to focus, to get them uncomfortable, have them, I mean, they probably don't want to get uncomfortable, but if you have them learn how to communicate through sensitive topics, through sensitive issues, through social issues, as we can see, it creates a huge burden. I mean, when you wake up in the morning, you go to work, you're thinking about the impact of the world, the weight of the world, what's going on outside of your company that's going to affect the way you communicate, the way you act inside of your organization. All that plays a role. So if you don't know how to address these issues, then you're going to be, your mental focus is going to be evident in your work. And I think, like I said, the key sales point that I have is that the ancillary effect of the program is that once you learn how to communicate, be a better communicator, that helps with sales, that helps with marketing, it helps with your problem solving, just problem solving, right? So it builds a better organization.
So let me look back at my questions. Diversity.
Jina, while you're looking back at the questions, is it okay to launch another poll question?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you for the time check.
Of course, we're going to go ahead and launch poll question number 2. The question, what percentage of the workforce in your organization is of the millennial generation? Give your best guess. Go ahead and get this answer in as quickly as you can. There will be 2 more poll questions after this one. We're going to leave it open for just a bit longer. Of course, questions and comments, go ahead and put those in the questions panel.
So while the poll is open, somebody called me out. I didn't have traditionalists on the list of generations, but traditionalists are the generation above boomer or older than boomer. And somebody needed to check that box. So my bad. I'm sorry I left that one off. And then another person had asked about what's the difference between a generation and a decade. And the generations I'm talking about are just the ones that have been defined by, trying to think of who. There are different places and different sources that group us by generations. But if you think there's a cohort of adults, they give birth to the next generation. And so the generation may span a period of time. It's not just a decade. And then that next cohort gives birth to the next generation. I'm sorry, so the poll is closing. I see that.
Yes, just wanted to make sure everyone knew the poll was closing. It is now closed. Jina, back to you.
So 34% said 50%. Oh, I'm not even going to do this because now this gets confusing.
Yeah, I was looking.
Well, so 8% said they weren't sure. And then a third said maybe 50% of the workforce. A third said maybe 31% of the workforce. And the rest were split between maybe 15 to 10% of the workforce. And we know that the workforce, generally speaking, is predominantly millennial these days, today. Generally, that's not true in every organization, but it's just a generalization. All right, so what I was going to ask you before the poll is there's a term diversity, and then there's the term inclusion. And they're often put together as if diversity and inclusion are one thing, when in fact they're 2 completely different things. How do you see that? Do you see D&I as a thing, or do you really focus on inclusion versus diversity?
Yeah, I honestly hate terms. I think a lot of this stuff is the same stuff. I mean, you can separate it, you can define it. I'll break it down. So basically, when I think of diversity, I think of a room full of people from different backgrounds. When I think of inclusion, I think of those people feeling connected or feeling like they have a voice. So it is different, but to me, it's just I don't. To me, like that's what I expect. You know, I mean, if I have a group of people who are different from different backgrounds inside of a room, I mean, if they feel separated, that's weird to me. Like, I don't know. But a lot of people feel that way. And so, but yeah, diversity, we have terms up on the website. You know, I've done the research on the terms themselves. I created examples for those terms, but I'm a guy who's focused on the meaning behind the words, or what you mean behind the words, rather than the words you actually use. Because I think anybody can say the right thing, but you can read somebody's energy or attitude behind the words, and that's what really hits you.
I'm trying to figure out how I feel about that statement. Well, because I think words matter. I think in the space of D&I in particular, so there's concerns on a lot of people who ask questions about political correctness, and they're even afraid to talk about this stuff because, and we're in cancel culture. So people, if you say the wrong thing, it can come back to bite you. And so there are people who are very careful about what they say. And you just said, but the energy behind them might be different. And that goes both ways. Like they might be saying something that perhaps isn't landing well, but the energy behind them suggests their good intentions.
Right.
The exact opposite is true. They might be saying the perfect thing in the perfect way, but the energy behind them is not so good.
Yeah.
So isn't that's what worries me about that is it leaves it to interpretation.
Right.
But I got to go with what somebody says. Does that make sense? If you use these words with me, then I've got to assume that that's your intention, unless you can explain otherwise.
Right. That second part is big. And that's why I try to focus on communication inside of the program and building relationships, because if you can explain what you mean, then I'm not going to say you can say anything you want, but I mean, I still say, you know, some things that are edgy or not politically correct, but it's because I say it a different way. I've studied there's just
So there's a comment. I will tell you this. I'm sorry to interrupt. I will tell you because of what you just said. Somebody made a comment in here that Jimmy the Greek got fired for similar comments. And I believe that came through when you were saying stuff that I said. It made me feel a little bit cringy. And I think part of that is, I think, what we tolerate and what we tolerated 15 years ago and what we tolerate today is different. So what you could say back in the day was a little, we didn't speak so openly about these things, but I do think language, the way you express things does matter. But then there's also the worry that just like the chairman, I think it was the chairman of the Olympics, was terminated because of something he said back in the 80s. Now, it was horrible what he said, but cancel culture doesn't give me an opportunity to have learned from what I did back then. I'm just held accountable for what I did when I didn't know what I was doing.
Right. And I can't stand the political correctness and the cancel culture. I really can't stand it. So that's why I don't like the way I approach DEI is different. It's very different. Like it's not the standard. It's not what you probably expect.
You just want to put a bunch of different people in a room and say, y'all work it out.
Yeah, I kind of like to see people get triggered. It's because I think that creates attention and vulnerability, and then it creates progress.
But you're talking about it in the same space. You're talking about creating a platform and a venue. Yeah. I can go into a room and I can have a conversation with somebody I don't know. That conversation can flip and become a bit uncomfortable. But the idea is I can work through that conversation because I know that the space I'm in is safe.
Right. So, I mean, going back to that comment of what the commenter said about Jimmy Green, is that a white man or is that a white person?
Jimmy the Greek?
Jimmy the Greek.
White guy.
White guy. Okay. Well, I want to say that in society, as a white person, or as a person of privilege and you have inherent social power or social privilege, you can't, that's the way society works right now in regards to, so basically a person of color could say something that a white person, so basically if a white guy says, oh, dang, look at these black guys out here having fun playing, or let's say this, let's say a black sportscaster, he says, dang, that white boy can play. A white sportscaster cannot say, dang, that black guy can play.
Not in the same way. I get your point.
So,
well, but you're talking about, okay, so now you want to get into some interesting things. You're talking about privilege. So you use the word privilege, and there are people, white, who would say, I don't have privilege, because there's this perception that privilege, it includes concepts of wealth and access that some people who don't have financial wealth, and they're white. And there are people who are people of color and they're wealthy. And I think that the way you're using privilege, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the way you're using privilege is that if you are white, you have some blind spots about groups that aren't white, because the things that those groups have had to, the barriers that those groups have had to overcome, the challenges that they face, aren't even on your radar as a white person. And so when you start talking about these things, it comes off as what? Racially blind, tone deaf?
Yeah, I'm talking about the way society addresses it. I'm not talking about like the individual person. I'm talking about if you're in a public platform or you're saying things publicly and you're a person of a privileged position, if you're a man talking about women, that a woman can say things that a man can't say, because the people it's so hard to put into words. I have to be able to figure this out. But I'm talking about the way society attacks that person, so because I was addressing the comment about why that person got fired and why somebody like me as a black man can say certain things about the way I see the world, and why I might agree with that white person, but if he says it publicly, is different the way society addresses it.
Well, part of it, I think, is that in your example, a woman versus a man, the woman can speak to it from experience, and hopefully articulate whatever the thing is she's talking about, to express the challenges and the positions and the issues. She's not speaking on behalf of another group. She's speaking for her own group. Because a white man can speak to an issue from the perspective of a white man.
Yeah.
He can't speak to the issue from the perspective of a Pan-Asian woman. So let me throw out some questions at you, because wow, I'm looking at the time.
Yeah, I told you.
Said, can I be a baby boomer with more of a millennial outlook? Absolutely, Karen. You can have. I'm a Gen Xer, and I don't think I think like a Gen Xer. So, and plus, to Victor's point, when we get together and meet with people and connect with people, we learn more and our perspectives shift. How do you go beyond from just talking about it and putting it in a mission statement to actually doing it? I've had employers that are all talk and no action. This is a long one, sorry. It's frustrating trying to stand up for your employees against your own supervisor. In my last situation, both myself and the diverse employee eventually left the company. Do we need to change hiring/promotion processes? People naturally gravitate toward people they like, that they are like them. Many outsource the hiring. Okay, that might be a wee bit beyond the scope of this course, but
no, that's a very interesting point in regards to people hire who they like. That's one of the things that I'm trying to do with the program. Eventually, I want the program to open the door to who you like.
So to create more diverse.
Yeah, right. So that's why I also use target the corporate America professional landscape, because I want, like I said, that's going to increase your sales pipeline if you want to connect with people from different sales markets. It's going to increase your hiring pipeline if you want. Oh, I met this person through this program. Oh, cool. I'll just hire them. Like I've talked to them. I know them. Cool. Like, okay.
I saw a statistic recently about the power of diversity, especially when you look at the diversity of the millennial group. and their age. So millennials are approaching the traditional middle manager, upper management, soon to be senior management levels in corporate America, and they can open up an organization to more diverse networks and more diverse customer bases. So absolutely. I'm looking at some other comments that came through here. Oh, and before that, we have like maybe 10 minutes. I want to share just a couple of slides.
Jina?
Yes.
Do we have time to launch another poll question before we move on?
Let me hang on 2 seconds before we ask this next question.
No problem.
I want to share these 2 slides first. So first we have general ideas about why it's important and what to do to support a more diverse workforce. One, having a DEI committee or a council. This is the type of group, for example, that would be able to explore a program like a Racebridge and say, does this fit in our organization?
Right.
The second bullet here is just simply recognize it. I mean, the holidays that most organizations give off are Christian and Jewish. But if I'm Muslim, if I'm Hindu, if I'm Buddhist, I don't have days that I get to take off. You're asking me to take vacation of my own vacation. That's not particularly fair. And so recognizing those cultures, incorporating them into your benefits, and if nothing else, let's celebrate Heritage Month. Pride Month was last month. And did your organization recognize Pride Month and do some kind of a celebration? Not just for the LGBTQ employees, but for the whole company.
Right.
Allyship programs are programs where an ally is somebody who champions, advocates, mentors, and works with groups other than their own. So for me, I'm cisgender, meaning I identify as a female, and I was assigned the female at birth. So I'm a female. And that's a weird way to say it. But I could be an ally for the LGBTQ community. I'm not Hispanic, but I could be an ally for the Hispanic community in my company. So that's what I mean by allyship. And then there's just, to your point, D&I training, creating awareness, ongoing education, professional development opportunities. And then this last slide for the poll question, and it is, what can you do specifically to support employee engagement? One is providing or thinking about forming employee resource groups, whole host of reasons here why. And then affinity group support, whole host of reasons here why. Racebridge is an example of a network that provides networking and development opportunities, not just for the people of color, but for everyone in the organization.
Everybody.
Now, Jason, we can go to the polling question because I wanted to throw some of the examples out there first.
No problem. So this is going to be poll number 3, which should be up on everyone's screen. Does your organization have programs or benefits aimed at millennials? Yes, no, not sure. Go ahead and get your answers in. We're going to leave this open for long enough to get a majority of responses. And then we're going to go ahead and close this out probably in about 30 seconds or so.
Somebody said, can't stand the political correctness either. Thank you. That's refreshing to hear. Somebody said tone is a big deal too. And I don't know what time that came in and what we were talking about, but I think context matters when you're having a conversation. I can't just say something out of the blue, and the timing of when I say it, the context of when I say it matters.
Of course. But that's the problem with media, is that people cut videos and then the tone or the context isn't taken into account.
How much time do we have left on the poll? I'm trying to think, can I read another?
I actually just went ahead and close out of the poll. Please take as much time as you need in the questions panel. There are a couple more comments that did come in. Of course, if anyone has other comments, put them in the questions panel as well. We'll have one more poll before we close out of the webinar in about 10 minutes or so.
So, the question was, does your organization have programs and benefits for aimed at millennials? And 26% said yes, 36% said no, but the majority, 38%, said they're not sure. And what is interesting, in my work at Grant Thornton and some of the consulting work that I did before Grant, and then my time at NABA, my observation was most of the programs were either at pipeline issues, which you were talking about earlier, or development of people in the manager role, not a lot for the people in the in-between, which largely were millennials. And part of it was because millennials didn't participate in the programs. So it's a bit of a catch-22. You creating a program for millennials, but then you create one and they don't show up.
Yeah, that's funny. Going back to the earlier poll, you saw it was like a lot less of, there was older people or more seasoned people here attending this webinar. So, I mean,
thank you for saying seasoned and not older. That was a good correction.
Come on now.
Good correction.
But yeah, it's very hard for an organization to really to target all those markets of diversity. I think it's a lot of work. So I think it's hard. Like, even me thinking of myself as a CEO running an organization, I don't know if I would target every specific demographic of diversity. I don't know if I would be as sharp. So basically what I'm saying is that you would need somebody to do that for you inside of your organization. But beyond that, even if you have a head of diversity, that's not enough. Because I think, like what we're talking about here, the reason why I created this program as well is that I want everybody to take action. I don't want you to attend. I mean, you can attend the webinar. I mean, that's great, but I want you to take action. Like, I don't want people to watch other people take action. Like, every time I talk about diversity, oh, did you read that book? Did you see this speaker? What have you done? What actions?
Go out and do something. And part of what you want them to do is engage. Simply put.
Yes.
Talk with, meet with, sit down, have lunch with, go to training with people who are different than you, which are often not your colleagues, because so many of us work in an environment where most of our colleagues look like us.
Yeah.
By us, I mean, I'm probably speaking about this as a white person. Just looking at the data. So there are a couple comments in here, and I'm going to run through them really quick. I'm not sure this one is for you, but how do you ensure team members, particularly management level team members, can't opt out? Are there incentive suggestions, maybe positive or penalty? And I think that, this is about holding management and leadership accountable.
Yeah.
And leadership can only be made accountable to the extent that leadership agrees to be held accountable. That's one of the challenges of leadership. But what your generation can do, especially if my generation is part of the leadership barrier, y'all could just quit. And not that you will, but what I said earlier, 67% of the workforce today, when asked, would leave their current job and go to a different job if their company did not demonstrate a commitment to and accountability to that commitment for D&I. They'll leave and go to another company that does. And so perhaps that's the bar. I don't know. I don't know that I've answered the question, but this one is about you. My own view, as Victor stated, is that most of these organizations have issued statements in support of DEI without any meaningful strategic direction or solution. I'm a boomer, as is most of the management ownership in business and sports industries. What do they need to do or hear to make DEI in their organizations real?
Take the program. But no, I think, to make it real, that's how you make it real with a relationship.
Yeah. So this person asks, so does Racebridge allow people to meet new people who don't look or identify like you? So many of us are still working from home. Oh, that's a fair point. So, but besides the work from home piece, does Racebridge allow people to meet different people?
Yeah, the way our credit and point system is operated is that if you have a conversation, because it's basically you get credits off of conversations. So if you have a conversation with someone in your same racial demographic, you get like 1 point. If you have conversation with someone outside of your racial demographic, then you get 3 points. So you get more credits, and basically we call them sponsors. So if your sponsor is diverse, then you have more credits assigned to you, because that's the whole point.
So this is gamification, is what you're doing.
I try to make it fun.
Yeah.
I try not to have such a heavy energy around DEI, even though it is, but I just try my best. But
this gets to the very part of the thing that I said at the beginning, which is that generations generally see DEI different, and you're looking at it from a community perspective, where maybe somebody in the boomer ranks is looking at it as a representation, access, fairness question, and then varying degrees. That's a spectrum. So there's a comment here I want to address, and I'll read it. It says, "This is a very political correctness training. People should be judged on who they are and their integrity. In my generation, integrity always rises to a higher level. And to that person, I would say, that is a beautiful ideal. I don't think we're trying to speak to political correctness. We also know that there have been systemic barriers and there are natural biases in our country. And so I think people have good intentions, but our biases override some of that. And systems prohibit some from having equal opportunities. Once we are all given an equitable support, perhaps then performance and integrity really do rise to the top. So I thank you for that comment. I just wanted to address it. I can't change somebody's mind. I hope we're not being seen as focusing solely on political correctness. I'm sure that wasn't my intent, and I'm not speaking for you, but I'm guessing that wasn't your intent either.
That was the perception, that this is politically correct?
That this is a political correctness conversation. So.
Wow. That's crazy.
So another question, can you have last question, I'm guessing, there has to be a quick answer because we're almost out of time. Can you have safe space conversations in a work environment?
Oh, we don't have them connect with people inside of their organization. We give them like scripts to connect with people outside of their organization and their personal network, business network, social media, doesn't matter, but we don't want them talking about this stuff with people inside of their organization.
So you create the safe space outside of the organization, which is smart because I mean, once you're inside the organization, people tend to clam up a little bit because.
Yeah, you're not going to be honest inside of the workplace. You're not.
To a degree, yeah, I agree.
But you're going to fear that those honest things that you said are going to come back to haunt you.
Some of the more sensitive topics you're generally going to hold back. I would agree.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to get to.
Victor?
Jina, since we only have a few minutes left.
Sorry,
okay?
last poll question. Yep.
Oh, please. We're going to go ahead and launch the final poll question. I know I speak for myself, but I hope I speak for much of the audience when I say that this has been an incredibly enlightening conversation, and it's been great to have both of you on the platform here today. So while we have this last poll up, I'm just going to do some quick end of webinar housekeeping before we conclude. CPE will be issued by CPA Academy by the end of the day today. It should be available in your accounts within 24 to 48 hours. Webinar evaluations should be going out by email. If you don't get your evaluation by email, the link is available in your CPA Academy accounts. We're going to close this poll out in about 15 seconds or so, and I will turn it back over to Jina and Victor to wrap up with maybe one more question and some concluding comments, and then we'll go ahead and close out.
I don't think we have time for a question, but thank you. I'm seeing, and I appreciate the honesty of our audience. Almost 27% said they're here for the CPE. And so I would hope that at least maybe you got a nugget of something where maybe you're curious. I would invite everybody to join us. This is a series that runs every other Friday. And so 2 weeks from now at 3 o'clock, Susie Silver's joining me. She's from the diversity movement, and she's going to be talking about allyship, which is a term you hear about often, but we don't all necessarily know what it means or how I can be an ally, and an ally for who. So that's enough out of me. My contact information is always in the deck. On Victor's slide with his information at the bottom is his contact information. If you open up that PDF attachment, you can click on any of those little icons and click right through to our emails and websites. Victor, thank you for joining me, as always, and it's a pleasure talking with you.
You too, Jina. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
And thanks to you both, and thanks, of course, to the audience for your participation and your attendance. We're going to go ahead and close out now. So once again, thanks to Jina and Victor for facilitating today's conversation, and we hope to see you all on future webinars. We hope you all have a great rest of the day. Take care.